right, everyone, welcome back to the Red, White, and Matt show. Hopefully you're here today. If not, it's fine because it's early one. But today we're going to be covering the crypto boom, the SCOTUS. Apparently it might go to 11, so we'll discuss that. And then also going over the highlights from the Floyd trial this week and kind of the defense's take on the trial. So let's go ahead and get started with our first video.
Last time we saw Dogecoin pump like this, we started seeing a lot of smaller cap cryptocurrencies really exploding and surging in value as well. So those are the type of cryptos I focus on, is the small cap hidden gems that are extremely low market cap with low circulating supply, that have a team that's building great token utility and continuing to grow and expand. So jumping into the crypto news, interesting article here from Yahoo Finance, 10 best cryptocurrencies to invest in for 2021, and they pretty much just listed all the top 10 cryptos here. So they did mention Bitcoin, Ethereum, Binance Coin, USDT, Cardano, Polkadot, Ripple XRP, Litecoin, Chainlink, and Stellar XLM. So just a list of the top 10 cryptos basically, and an explanation. Regardless though, this is pushing mass adoption. More and more finance news websites are starting to talk about cryptocurrency. It's really becoming the hot thing right now. While the stock market is kind of rocky, the crypto space continues to climb and break new all-time highs.
Right now, just looking at crypto, we're looking at this morning on Saturday, April 17th. We're looking at Ethereum at 2407. So it's kind of leveled out. Bitcoin seems to be going down just a little bit, but 60,881. So that was up to like 63,000 the other day, I think. Dogecoin surprisingly got all the way up to I think like 36 cents or 34 cents. That one blew my mind. I never even saw that day coming, to be honest, with a coin that was meant to be a meme. But that can just kind of tell you what the power is whenever people really start to invest. And keep this in mind, this week came on the back of Coinbase entering the stock exchange. And I was actually looking into that last night. But, when Coinbase went into the stock exchange this week, I noticed the valuation drops quite rapidly. I kind of figured that would happen. But I'm also curious to see Coinbase on the stock exchange and see how it reacts in terms of crypto and its volatility. If investors are going to, or if day traders really are going to sell and buy based on that activity on crypto itself. I think over time it'll probably be less selling and buying in the long term for that exchange or that stock in particular, because I think they'll probably start to get used to it. But as he noted, crypto is becoming more and more mainstream. People are kind of, leaving the traditional finance system. Even last night, I was thinking about how you can invest in terms of stable coin. So there's some stable coin out there that are technically supposed to match a real world, currency or whatever. So you have US dollar
USD
coin or something
coin.
like that. Yeah. So but generally though, it stays around $1. It dips barely at all. But I was thinking about it, and there's certain apps or different applications or whatever, company software where you can invest and grow your money. And I heard an ad for one last night. It was up to 20% APR. That right there is extremely high. So it's why put your savings, say for college savings account into something or an IRA when you can literally dump it into crypto and you're making 20% APR no matter what. It's not going down or up. Yeah, it's sure you can't be as aggressive, say with an aggressive stock portfolio or something where it'll be really good one year or something, right? Just something out of the ordinary. But on general, most people say you can grow about 6 to 8%. I think you can get up to 13% a year, but 20% year to year to year, that's very aggressive growth and something you can count on. So I think this is going to change the future of investing. It is still kind of like a casino right now in these early days, but right now is also the time where you can make the most money and growth. So just keep that in mind, although this is more volatile. I would just say to keep your eyes out. Definitely, if you're interested in crypto, look into it. Um, I'm also starting to shift where I think you can probably make more money on the altcoins than you can with the uh, bigger money, although it's more stable. So, like, think about Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Ether. Um, some of the other ones too that are up there. These are kind of like the top cryptos, but the amount of value that they're going to gain probably will not be as much as some of the altcoins, although the altcoins might be a little more volatile. In the long run, I think they'll probably all grow, right? So just keep that in mind. If you're looking into crypto, definitely go look into it. I recommend it. Could be an investment that you'll never want to regret, basically. So I recommend it, especially if you're not with the company or if you're like a trucker or something and you don't have a 401k matching or something like that. It's definitely a great way for you to grow your money, and you could become rich, to be honest. Like, you could become rich. So Kenny, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna disagree with that gentleman on one thing. Stocks are actually the ones that have been very consistent lately, not cryptos. So if you look at the S&P 500 and a lot of these other markets, they are only going up a few percentage points or down a few percentage points for the last couple of months, right? We look 1, 2, 3%, which is a lot of movement. It's not like some of these cryptos are moving 15, 20% in a 24-hour period, right? So it's actually a lot more volatile in the crypto sphere than it is in the stocks. But here's the deal. People make their money on the ups and down swings. Okay, so when you look at like investing, I'm not a professional investor, so just I'm a driver for a reason. Okay, but if you look at it, markets go in cycles, right? They go ups and downs, and it's somewhat predictable depending on the climate in which they're operating in, right? So whether or not there's going to be regulations or if there's other places to take your money. But for the most part, it's the volatilities where people's making their money. So they're buying the dips, and then 24 hours later or 48 hours later, the crypto spikes, and then that's when they're selling it, and that causes a dip again. So the people who are riding the waves and the crest, they are continuously pumping money every 24 hours to 48 hours, depending on the crypto. Because some places go, like some of them are average holdings 28 days. Some of them are averaging 2 hours. So depending on where you're sitting in your market, you're seeing. But the banks are doing the same thing. A lot of these loans, I think like let me say Adam, I think it's like 3% or whatever. Okay, so do you want your money sitting in a 10-year bond? Maybe this is the larger picture we should be talking about. Do you want your money sitting in a 10-year bond making a tenth of a percentage point? Well, your inflation, we've proven it before that your inflation rate's between 8 and 10% depending on what you're doing. So you're making 1/10 back from what your inflation is. That means if you invest $100 at the end of the year, you can buy $90 worth of goods, and because you left your money in a bank or whatever, you get $90.10. So you still lost $9.90 worth of purchasing power. So, or you can pump the stock market every other day for 3% gain. Because like people like me and you, like I don't have a lot of money in cryptos. I have a little bit, just to have some exposure to the market in case it does go. Which, by the way, I did pull all my money out of Bitcoin. Big whoop, $100 or whatever, $200. Why? Because I figured, okay, if I have $200 invested in Bitcoin and it doubles in value to $120,000, I'm going to have $400 instead of $200. I pull my money out. I can find better things to double my money in the meantime. And I do like a lot of these smaller cap coins. Just me personally, I also like gold, silver, bullets, the whole spectrum. I like a well-diversified portfolio, and everybody's got to do what makes them comfortable. So, but like I said, in the meantime, there is nothing to indicate that the stock market is going to go down 90% like some people think it is, right? Right? Because the Federal Reserve has come out and said that they're going to do whatever it takes to keep it afloat, right? So these banks can kind of comfortably ride the waves. They can see when the market goes down, dump a bunch of their portfolio money that could be sitting in a 10-year bond, but it's not because they're not getting anything. So they can pull some of that money out and ride those waves just like everybody else does. And for that purpose, it actually gives cryptocurrencies a purpose other than just existing. Because you can have stocks and bonds that exist for no apparent reason, right? In which case they wouldn't have any value. So I think cryptos going forward is going to be like a digital precious metal, where it is both a store of value and a speculative asset. Where people, well, I don't want silver and gold because I don't want to have to store it. I mean, it's like you can do the same thing with oil, but oil, at some point, you actually have to take physical possession of it, right? And a lot of these banks, they're not looking to take physical possession of anything. They don't want oil. They may speculate on oil, but they're not going to take, barrels of oil and store it in the basement. This is why oil went to basically zero last year, because all the contracts came up and people were like, look, you bought the oil, here's your oil. So, and then, they don't want to deal with the handling requirements of silver and gold, where they got to have a vault to store it in. And then they got to pay somebody to physically move it. They want to hit a button on a screen and make that transaction happen. And cryptocurrencies has provided an outlet for them to do speculative market. And it's also come for like mom and pop stores to say, look, it's going up. Let me not put my money in a bond. Let me put it someplace where it's potentially gain some value. And there's nothing to say coming down the road unless they regulate it. I don't foresee that coming anytime soon, at least not for the next 2 or 3 years. Okay, so they're going to put their money in an asset that's clearly going up. It's an exciting market and people are, getting the buzz off it. But now it's actually providing a usable service to the community where, okay, it's being used as a universal service. Like if you come to somebody and say, I got a Bitcoin for sale, right? It's not like back in 2009, 2010, where it's like buying a box of trading cards. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Now everybody knows what it is. It's just like silver and gold. Silver and gold has always been a not only a hedge against inflation, it's been a universal currency. You can take an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, go anywhere in the world, and people will trade for it because they know what it is. Well, now we are getting to that same point with cryptocurrencies, and not just Bitcoin. A lot of these altcoins are so well known that they're accepted. Their nominal value may be a lot lower, but it's no different than having a 1/10,000th amount of silver, like having a Litecoin or some of these other cryptos, and having like a Bitcoin. So it's still universal. It's getting more and more where these small ones are universally traded, and therefore they have their own store of value because people know what they are. So I don't see it going down anytime soon.
Right now, there's a bill to expand the Supreme Court by 4 seats, and would you commit to bringing that bill to the floor?
No. I support the president's commission to study such a proposal, but frankly, I'm not. Right now, we're back. Our members, our committees are working. We're building putting together the infrastructure bill and the rest. I don't know that that's a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's an idea that should be considered, and I think the president's taken the right approach to have a commission to study such a thing. It's a big step. It's not out of the question. It has been done before in the history of our country a long time ago. And the growth of our country, the size of our country, the growth of our challenges in terms of the economy, et cetera, might necessitate such a thing. But in answer to your question, I have no plans to bring it to the floor, no.
You know what? I actually thought she did a fairly good job with that speech. I may not agree with why she did it or whatever, but I thought she did. I thought she explained it fairly well. And getting back to the issue of Supreme Court justice, right? Okay, we have to understand or look at it. What is the purpose of the Supreme Court, and why do they want to expand it, right? And I'll just hit this real quick. Okay, so the job of the Supreme Court is not to make policy. Their job is to make sure that policies coming out of houses of government are in line with the Constitution. That's all they do. They recommend or make a recommendation. They can't strike down a law. They can only say, hey, look, this is an illegal law for this purpose. So what's the purpose of expanding it if they can only look at one law at a time and then issue a recommendation? Okay, maybe they can split up an issue, and then other judges can look at that and write up a paper to present it to the rest of the group, right? That would be a legitimate reason to expand the court if that's how they handle that, or decide that's how they want to handle it. But if it's simply for the fact that we're not getting our way, and this goes for either side, we're not getting our way, we are going to try and pack the courts to get our way. Well, now that's wrong, because now you're not doing it for a constitutional purpose. You're doing it so they can rubber stamp what you want to do, which you already know is illegal. So that's what I got on that.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's hilarious to me because she says, this is for the people, but it's like, no, it's for the people that you're representing. This isn't for like everyone, right?
Well, that's communist. That's communist tactics right there. course.
Yeah, like they always, I mean,
Rhetoric.
both sides do it too. It's not, I wouldn't say exclusive to Democrats, but I just hate when politicians say, "Oh, it's for the people." So I'm like, yeah, which people are you talking about? Like the lobbyists, or who exactly are you talking about there? But you know, like it's sad, and it's sad that we've gotten to this point now where they even want to expand the Supreme Court, and it's like really the one section that's not supposed to be political. I mean, it's still political, and I think I'm perfectly okay with limiting the terms for the Supreme Court justices. I think they've looked at this before. It's anywhere from like I think 16 to 20 years seems to be like a good amount of time. But expanding it to 11 at this point, it's definitely, everyone clearly sees that they want to do this for political purposes. I mean, FDR and them actually stopped it, so I would hope that they had continued that precedent. But her saying this, I don't believe her one bit, right? Like, I know at the end of the day, they're going to try to expand that while Biden is in office. They're going to. Right now, it's just her politically maneuvering to try to make it seem like, oh, we're not that radical. And it's like, I think you are, though. Whether or not you want to try to play like you are, I think her doing it is trying to play like, good cop, bad cop card here when it comes to the legislators that presented the material versus the other Democrats that didn't, like her, right? So I think they might have even planned this. I don't know. That's kind of conspiracy.
Well, I think you're right. And I also think it's a safe move on her point, because let's be honest, how conservative is the Supreme Court? I would argue not very conservative as far as conservatives are concerned. So if she doesn't get it, I don't think she's really hurting that bad, because she looks good on all sides. And I would not consider the Supreme Court as it sits right now to be a threat to any agenda that she's going to propose. And which goes back, and now this is what truly bothers me, is the fact that there is a large portion of the American population that is okay with basically court packing. Let's just call it what it is. It's court packing. On both sides are perfectly okay with court packing, instead of asking the question, how does this fulfill the requirements of that branch of government? If they're saying, look, each individual judge, they take up a court case, they look at it, then they issue an opinion to the rest of the judges. Okay, if adding more judges can help speed along some of these bills and issues that come up to the Supreme Court, that's one thing. But if you're doing it just to pack the court so you get a certain kind of decision, whether it's right or wrong, the American people should not be okay with that. Nobody should be okay with that, because we're not doing it for the right purpose. We are now overriding the purpose of the Supreme Court.
For me, especially with the Democrats moving and doing like reconciliation as much as they can at this point, I know that the Supreme Court system will be more in terms of their favor for the long term, right? And really, I'm thinking about this upcoming midterm. I think the Democrats are threatened because they kind of have moved more so to the radical area. I think they're being threatened in the Senate. I even think they're being threatened in the House. I think the House, it's only like a 12-seat difference. And these are small areas that can definitely be changed. For the Senate, I actually believe it's a little bit more hard for Republicans to take control of that. Generally, these are states, so they're, I would say, a little bit harder to switch than these kind of small districts out there. And like, really, if you look back at this last election, like the Democrats got smoked when it came to the House. Like they were just losing left and right, just district after district, just losing, right?
And
so
guess
that's
what?
why I say the Republicans have a shot there as opposed to the Senate. So and the thing is, if you stop them there, you're stopping them everywhere else. You know what I mean? So.
I felt that Derek Chauvin was justified and was acting with objective reasonableness, following Minneapolis Police Department policy and current standards of law enforcement in his interactions with Mr. Floyd. I felt that that level of resistance exhibited by Mr. Floyd justified the officers and higher levels use of force that they chose not to select.
Did the use of force then continue after Mr. Floyd was restrained on the ground?
I don't consider a prone control as a use of force.
Did you record what his blood pressure was at that time?
Yes, it was 216 over 160. Had history of hypertension and had not been taking his medication.
There was a crowd, and I guess the crowd was becoming more loud and aggressive. A lot of yelling across the street.
Did that cause you any concern?
Concern for the officer's safety, yes.
Did you go over to try to help them?
No, because I guess my job was to watch the car and the two individuals that were by the car.
I got that one at home. All right, what's your name? George Perry Floyd. I don't know what's going on. Can I just see what y'all did to him?
Shawana,
He on the ground and everything.
stay over here, okay?
He on the ground? Yes. Where? Right here.
You know, whenever those officers, I'm going to go back to, the situation the officer was dealing with. Look, when we see these trials or whatever, people bring up, how great their person was, or he had a medical condition, or as an officer, I don't really give a hoot, because the only thing I can deal with is what I'm seeing on the ground, where I'm at, right? So I don't care if, the suspect the day before murdered 10 people, or he saved 10 people from drowning, right? I don't care if he had high blood pressure. And that sounds cold. It sounds cold. But as an officer, you have to understand, or at least the public has to understand, that officer doesn't know that. He's not walking around with a medical chart. And maybe in the future, let's drive something like this, where it pulls up the suspect's health or whatever, right? The officer had to deal with the situation on the ground. So they can bring up all that footage. To me, it's just pandering to the jury that, hey, this guy should be let off, or this guy should or should not be. As a juror, I would not be concerned with that. I'm also trying to be objective. I'm looking at what the officer did when he did it. Did the circumstances warrant it? Now, if you ask me, if there is a sufficient amount of people crowding around you saying that what you are doing is way out of line, I think you should step back possibly and reassess if what you're doing. Now, legally, and this is why I'm saying people are not going to like this. The officer is probably entitled to a reduced sentence, even if he gets convicted, because he was clearly doing what his department told him to do and how to do it. Now, we can disagree on whether or not those should have been policies, and I think that is something that needs to come up for debate, right? But if he was doing what he was told, the way he was told to do it, I can't see holding him responsible. But at the same time, looking at, okay, you're supposed to use good judgment whenever you're doing something. So yes, even though he could have legally been entitled to do what he was doing, his department told him that's how they wanted it done, and he was doing it as prescribed as the way he was taught, right? At some point, you are responsible to step back and take a look and be like, and reassess, hey, am I applying what I was told to do in a manner, or is this getting out of hand, right? Which, by the way, that is a use of force. If you have somebody on the ground and you are doing pain, pressure tactics or compressions like that, that's a use of force, because you are forcing somebody to do something they don't want to do. That's a use of force. Get it through your head, or the jury, whatever, get it through your head. That's what it is. But they were doing it as a means, of causing the person to settle down. Does that make sense? So, this is where for like chokeholds. I mean, you're not necessarily trying to kill them. You're trying to get them in a position where they can't operate in the way they're trying to operate. That's the point of it. Pain compliance, compression compliance, all these forms of things. So if he's sitting there struggling on the ground, they're trying to put him in a position where he can no longer, basically have exhaustion, right? In this case, it ended up killing the guy because he had prior medical conditions. So when we look at this in the situation, I see everything on that video is like, okay, they're just trying to sway the jury at that point. To me, it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. Like I said, because it doesn't matter if the guy was a saint or an angel. All I'm concerned about is what did that officer do at the point of, when Mr. Floyd expired. Because like I said, he was at that point, he was a warden of the state.
But kind of a separate point I want to make here, just in regards to like a lot of these situations that have been going on right now. At the end of the day, people forget that these officers are an authority figure. Recently, I think here in Maryland, they passed a law, which removes those officer protections. And basically, it seems like people are wanting to get officers down to like the same level as like a civilian, where, you know, we're on equal footing in terms of a civilian and a police officer. Um, that's definitely not a good way to go. I see what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it equal in terms of, you know, whenever these events occur, you know, like you could charge the officer equally or something like that, where the officer's not supposed to use like certain force or something like that. But it's a bad way to go. And people forget these are authority figures. You know, you're supposed to listen to them whenever they give you a command, which I would say is ethical, right? There has to also be some protections for these officers, some form of protection. Maybe not as strong as it is now, because the police unions, I would say, are pretty tough. But at the end of the day, my biggest takeaway from all this is police training has to be better. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but the police training has to be better. It has to be better officers being hired too. So the standards for officers, I think, should even raise to a higher standard. We saw like that officer, over in Virginia with the Army lieutenant. Like that guy, to me, I was like, the quality of officer there, I feel like is not too great. So, you know, all these things taking place hopefully will result in, you know, better officers, better training for the officers, or more training for officers, because the officers are spending a lot of time out in the field, in the streets, you know, going out policing, doing whatever they need to do. But everyone, I think, you could probably even ask police officers, they probably do not get enough training, because they're just so busy out there in the streets, right? So everyone defund the police, that's definitely probably not the way you want to go. We see all the liberal cities, especially on the West Coast, are starting to say, oh, actually, we shouldn't do that. Let's go ahead and pour the money back into the police department because crime is getting out of hand. So
see, let's look at that.
That's my biggest goal.
The defund the police movement, you have to look at who's backing that. It's communist people, right? They want a particular kind of outcome that basically puts them in charge and not police. But when we say police training, we also have to understand what that looks like, because obviously those officers was trained to use campaign compliance, but it appears they were not trained when to use it. That makes sense. So when we look at police need more training, we as a society have to come to an agreement of what that training is supposed to look like, right? And maybe some common sense training should be incorporated in the future, right? But as far as you know, like the officers. Okay, so officers themselves have no power. You just don't obey officers because they're quote an officer. What represents an officer is the fact that they have a badge on them, right? They have a shield. That's why they have a shield. Otherwise, in the Savior's shield. So when we look at an officer, what is an officer? An officer is a person that has been entrusted with a certain amount of power by the people. So we have a conflict here where the police, in a lot of cases, think that they have certain duties, responsibilities, and authority to act a certain way. But they do forget, and people do forget, that power that is vested in them did not come from the mayor who appointed the chief of police. That power was granted by the citizens. So when we as a society get pulled over by the police, we are not necessarily agreeing with that particular officer, but we have to understand that his power comes from our fellow citizens, and we have to answer to our fellow citizens. But when we have a situation, this is kind of the debate here, when we have police officers who appear to be separate from the citizens and act accordingly from the citizens will no longer look at the police as my fellow citizens who has been vested with a power to commute certain fines or tactics, right? And this is kind of the issue we have, where we have an us versus them mentality going on, and whether it's partly illusion, partly real, where the citizens have gotten to a point where they don't believe in the power that has been vested into the judicial system as a whole. It's not just police officers. If you are Joe Blow citizen and you do not know that you are going to get treated fairly, ethically, or for whatever reason, and a lot of this is really the citizen's fault, because and I've told this story before, I've been to jail and I'd be like talking to people in there, well, I got, caught for driving black. I was like, and then you find out they were doing 15 over the speed limit in a car that had no plates and tags. It's like, no, you were just doing dumb stuff and you gave them a reason to do it. So that's kind of another issue, but it runs in part of it. But if somebody gets pulled over and as soon as those lights get on and they have to question in their mind whether or not they're going to be treated fairly and ethically, or if they're just going to get blown away, there is a trust level that has been lost with the department. And that's partly the department's responsibility, but you're not going to get compliance from a group of people who have whether it's real or not, a perception that you are going to run them through the ringer. You're not going to get compliance. Compliance comes from knowing that you are going to be treated a certain way, because of the officer is going to handle that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we have to get to a point now where it's not just giving them training. Like if you tell me give them training, you're going to tell me like we're going to figure out how to get away with profiling black people, right? That's not proper training, right? Well, we're going to make it so we can legally do something that is not inherently right. So you can get trained for stuff like, I'm not saying they're doing it. I'm saying you can get trained for that. But we also have to look at the training we're providing them and question ourselves if that's the kind of training our police officers need to be having. Is that
point? Maybe that's where citizens could come together with the police department, right? If police departments were open to getting input from citizens and showing them, hey, this is the training standards, right? Police department, hey, here's the training standards. If we could just get input in regards what maybe you guys, more opinion from you guys on what you think maybe we should change it to or something like that, right? It's just opinion from the citizens, right? And showing the openness to citizens of, hey, we're open to listening to you guys and seeing what you want. You know what I mean? So when was Bitcoin created? What year did it come? Or sorry, not created, but when did it get to the public?
1998, isn't it?
2008.
Oh, dang.
And then it actually went up to 8 cents in 2010. So
what is the definition of militia as it was used in 1785 whenever they wrote the Constitution, or 1776?
They have a definition for it?
Oh yes.
Isn't it militia, I believe, is
and I got it from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, printed it that year.
Militia was just an unarmed group. I thought it was an unarmed group of like individuals that are, I don't know, I don't want to say selected by the state, but maybe it was the state. I don't know. That's my best guess.
Oh, when we say militia, and the reason I brought this up because I got in a conversation with somebody yesterday about, when we look at the Second Amendment basically says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, right? But we have to understand what those words mean. I don't care what people say today if those words mean, right? Because we can make up names or rules for any new word. But when you look at a historical context, something like the Second Amendment, you have to understand when those people use that word, what did they mean by it? So of course I went to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. I think it was the 1785 edition or whatever. And if you look at the definition of a militia, it's basically any able-bodied citizen of basically fighting age, basically the definition of it, right? Which back then was between the ages of I found different definitions of able-bodied. Some places said, between 16 and 50. It seems like the average was actually 17 to 60. So if you were a male of able body, between the ages of 17 and 60, you were considered by default part of the militia. Because, my original quiz question was, well, what gear did the original militia members carry? Because there was a point in the Revolutionary War where George Washington basically threatened to hang a bunch of militia members because they showed up to battle with no gear. They're like, well, you're supposed to give us the gear. Well, it's like, no, your job as being a member of your local militia was to have your own gear. So when we look at the well-regulated part is the fact that it's supposed to be set to a standard. It is not regulation in the sense that they control it. It's regulation that you should be well equipped to fight, which back then, was a musket. It was 20 rounds of shot. You're supposed to have a shot basket, or not basket, but a bag that had like 20 shots. You're supposed to have a canteen. You're supposed to have a sword and or a hatchet. So when we say well-regulated, we mean people who are outfitted for combat.
So kind of like militias that we actually see nowadays.
Well,
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
So when we look at that, okay, what did they mean by the definition? What I brought it up is like, what did they mean by it when we said militia? And people get it up. So it's like, well, it's a National Guard. Had nothing to do with National Guard. It's like the Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting.
They didn't have the National Guard back then.
Well, they had the local guard, but a lot of this, what I just said, was actually codified. You cannot do a Google search on this. It is ridiculous. I had to go through, in order to find even just a little bit of information, I had to go through state militias where they actually had laws saying, hey, look, every male between this age and this age, and actually a lot of them didn't say male, it's just basically any person, able-bodied person. So that included women in a lot of cases, right? Because they didn't have a National Guard. They didn't have a military.
Yeah.
And they kind of had a police, but this is kind of a non-government police force for the defense of the community.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. And once again, it's been another American experience.
Hey, thanks for watching the Red, White, and Matt Show with Kenny. Please like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for another American experience.